Before we get started with this episode, let me point out the obvious. It's the gift-giving season. But what isn't so obvious is that you can get your gifts and help out the podcast by going to comicsalternative.com/Amazon. Click through on our Amazon banner, and whatever you get during that visit, the Comics Alternative will get a few cents kickback. So get your Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, and Festivus gifts through our Amazon associate links. It's a smart way to shop, and you'll be helping out the show. So let's get started with this thing.
Here comes Santa Claus, right down Santa Claus way.
This is the Comics Alternative Webcomics, reviews of Snow Daze, Snow by Night, and Overwatch Reflections. Happy holidays, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics. I'm Derek.
And I'm Sean, and you're listening to two guys with advanced degrees talking about webcomics on the winter solstice.
That's right, yeah, we're recording this on the shortest day of the year, for those of you playing at home. And on our December episode, on time this month, unlike the November show from a few weeks ago, we're going to be looking at, if not holiday-themed webcomics, then webcomics that deal with the season or winter in one form or another. We're going to begin with Leonardo Faierman and Marcus Kwame Anderson's Snow Daze. After that, we're going to look at Snow by Night by Eric Menge, or Menge, I'm not sure how you pronounce the G in that last name, and Brittany Michel. And then after that, we're going to wrap up with a completed webcomic, Overwatch Reflections, by Michael Chu and Miki Montlló. But before we get to that discussion, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics is brought to you by the good folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts will be anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover. But every now and again, you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
And we'd be remiss if we also didn't talk about their sister company, mydigitalcomics.com, for all your digital comics needs. We're presuming that since you're listening to a podcast about webcomics, that you kind of might be interested in the digital ones as well. Get your comics in an electronic format. They've got a lot of your favorite publishers like Top Cow and Image and our Action Lab and Dynamite Entertainment and all these fun guys. They present everything in a CBZ or PDF format, which means everything is DRM free. And like I said, all the great people that brought to you at mydigitalcomics.com.
That's right. You know, whether you like your comics in digital format or in hard copy, you really can't go wrong with the people at Discount Comic Book Service and their sister company, mydigitalcomics.com. Go to dcbservice.com or mydigitalcomics.com. They'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering and online needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that Sean and Derek sent you. Sean, how's it going for you this holiday season?
It's doing all right. Taking a little bit of time off of work here, kind of rest and relax a little bit. The weather's not too terrible yet, so I'm doing all right this time. How about yourself?
About the same. Now, are you finished with work for the season, or do you still have some things to wrap up?
Formally, yeah, the work is over and done with. I will probably have to log in at least a couple of times just to make sure stuff doesn't break, but the bulk of it's kind of over and done with for the year for me, fortunately. So it'll be nice. Hopefully, first chance I've had to rest and relax in pretty much all year, I think, at this point. So I'm very much looking forward to not doing a whole hell of a lot of anything right now.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I want to try to get some reading done of things that I've been intending to get to, but I just haven't had the opportunity to. Now, this weekend, as we're recording this, I'm going to be driving up to northern Indiana and spending the holidays with my family, meeting everyone at my mother-in-law's house. So it being up there in northern Indiana, not only do we have the weather, but also there's the big possibility of lake effect snow.
Oh, yeah. I grew up in Cleveland. We got that all the time. It kind of ended up being a running joke is lake effect. Just seemed to blanket us and nobody much farther south. So we kind of got annoyed with the rest of Ohio that way.
Yes. So who knows? I may have a white Christmas.
We'll see. You know what? I have not looked at the weather forecast that far out yet.
Okay, let's talk about the webcomics that we're going to be discussing for December. And last year, if our listeners will recall, you and I talked about, for our December show, 3 Christmas-themed or holiday-themed webcomics. And I remember commenting on the fact that it was kind of difficult to find those. You know, there's no shortage of Halloween webcomics or horror, and those work really well with Halloween, but even webcomics that specifically mention Halloween in one form or another. However, with Christmas and even Hanukkah, it's different. Now, if you do a search, as we've done, for a few years, for webcomic holidays, webcomic Christmas, webcomic Hanukkah, you'll find a number of hits, but usually those are from strips, ongoing strips, that for a week or two, the topic of that strip will be Christmas or Hanukkah. And those are fine, but we're looking at webcomics as a whole, or a webcomic title as a whole, not just one or two entries from a week or a month, which I guess we could, but usually the mentioning of Christmas or Hanukkah is relatively short in these strips. And timely and understandably so. But this time around, and I think you're the one who fished all 3 of these out, Sean, we're looking at 3 webcomics. Now, one specifically does deal with Christmas, the Overwatch story, Reflections, that we're going to be talking about at the end of this show. The other 2, though, don't necessarily, I think if at all, mention anything about the holidays, but they have everything to do with snow. And as you pointed out to me earlier, perfect for the December webcomic show. Yeah, a couple of good ones here. And even honestly, that is a little unusual. You know, we don't get many comics that are that wrapped up in snow and winter and all that kind of stuff. But interesting that I was able to find a couple of them this time around, I thought. Well, we're going to start with a webcomic called Snow Daze, and that's Daze, D-A-Z-E. And this is written by Leonardo Faierman, and the art is by Marcus Kwame Anderson. And this can be found at www.snowdazecomic. That's one word, snow, D-A-Z-E, comic.com. And this is something that actually began, I think, was it 2013 that we saw the first entry? Yeah, May of 2013 is when this webcomic went up. And it was fairly consistent for a while throughout 2013 and then for a while into 2014. And then after that, the entries became a little sporadic. Now, the last piece that's up online right now, so for instance, if you go to the website and click on the last entry, it was put up on September 4th of this year, and it's not really any part of the story that had been ongoing. It's a series of illustrations and in color, and really nice at that. But the last story, which is titled Mientras, which I think is Spanish for menthol. I think I saw that at one place on the website, or menthols. They seem to, I guess, have wrapped that up quite a while ago.
Yeah, the last thing, I should point out that last update that they have from September that you mentioned, it's basically just a character study or a series of character studies. But he does have a note in there. I presume it's written by Leonardo there. He does have a note of, we're working on the next story and hoping to have that out soon, and just, variety. I think he kind of alludes to a variety of life issues that kind of get in the way, 9-to-5 job and et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But he says he's wrapping up some of that stuff, and they just need to. They've got, I think at the time, I think he said, I'm not seeing it here. There it is. About 75% penciled and inked of the as of early September this year for the next setup.
And that's good, because I was just checking it out, and the last piece that they uploaded that had anything to do with story that is ongoing was back in June of 2015. And up until right after this, everything had been in black and white. So any parts of the story, even just illustrations that were extra, were in black and white. But one of the things that they started doing later on into especially 2016, 2017, is to put up illustrations, usually character sketches, like you mentioned, that are in color. And I really appreciate that. Now, that's going to take more work on their part, but I think it does add to the feel of their webcomic. Although I like the black and white stuff.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it makes sense for this particular comic, I think. Mm-hmm. And we should probably back up and talk a little bit about what it is.
Right, about what it's about.
About what it's about, yeah. So the essential story is that you have this main character, Montlló, is... I don't think they get an exact age, but middle teenage years. I don't know, 13, 14, 15, something like that. And he is essentially, he and his mother, they moved to Queens, and he just, to try and keep himself out of trouble, to try and earn a little extra money, he starts shoveling driveways and sidewalks and whatnot. And he's successful enough at it that he's able to enlist a couple of his friends to help out with that, and that kind of expands. He's kind of getting more into an entrepreneurial spirit, and trying to grow his business and actually become. It's kind of a coming of age story, I guess, in how he's growing up and becoming more adult and learning about money and learning about the responsibilities and what that entails. So going back to the point about it not being in color, I think it does make sense because almost the entire story takes place in the middle of winter where they're shoveling snow. So it's kind of supposed to be white and gray everywhere anyway. So I think that makes sense. I mean, I do like the color illustrations that they present, certainly. Mm-hmm. But I think it does make sense, at least there's justification for doing it in black and white as well.
Yeah. And we were mentioning the art. Anderson's style is really impressive. I appreciate that, whether it be in color or black and white. Mm-hmm. Now, you were mentioning some of the main characters, and I guess arguably, especially in the first storyline, which is the first issue, it is this character Montlló. His name is Manolo, but he goes by Montlló. And then two friends that work closely with him in terms of shoveling snow. There's Guillermo, who goes by the name Gimo. And both of them, I believe, are Latino. And then there is an African American named Franklin who goes by the name Boy, interestingly enough. So it's the three of them who, at least in issue 1, which is what I'm looking, about 32 pages long. It doesn't seem long, but actually I think that 32 pages of the Snow Daze webcomic is worth, let's say, 2 or 3 times the kind of reading experience in terms of the amount of text, the detail, as some of these other webcomics that we're going to be looking at. And that's not to sell short Snow by Night and Overwatch Reflections by any means, as we will see as we get into a discussion of those later. It's just that it seems to me that the writing or the condensing of story in Snow Daze is a little more compact.
Yeah.
Than in the others. And that's fine. I mean, I'm not suggesting that one is better than the other. It's just an observation in terms of storytelling style. I mean, obviously, as we'll point out, Snow by Night has been going on for a lot longer, and there's much more to take in. But with Snow Daze, 32 pages, it seems a little longer than that, but it seems longer in a good way. So we have two storylines for all practical purpose. One that we call, I guess, issue 1. It's the very first issue of Snow Daze. This is when we're introduced to Montlló, his snow shoveling business, and his friends Jimo and Boy. And then the second story that we have, we've already mentioned, Mientras. And this one, I don't know. I'd like to get your take on this, and especially comparing this second narrative arc to the first one. I felt that Mientras was, I don't want to say sporadic in terms of its story content, but it seemed to be, in a way, kind of meandering and all over the place. In other words, what I got the sense that Faierman and Anderson were doing is mapping out more fully their story space, right? So we're introduced to new characters here and situations and businesses in the neighborhood where we don't necessarily follow a more coherent or at least single storyline as we did in that first issue, which was, I think, fairly clearly delineated. But in this second narrative arc, Mientras, it seems to just kind of bounce around from one character or series of characters to another, doing a variety of different things. At times, people are playing video games. At other times, a character like Jimo, we're inside of a dream that he has, which is very Star Trek-ish and sci-fi-ish. And then there's a little bit of the snow shoveling business thrown in that Montlló oversees, but not near as much as we get in that first narrative arc.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that goes to my guess is anyway. My guess is that kind of goes to that the illusions that they make later on about just having a larger workload and trying to manage, life's business as well as doing this webcomic. In that, we've got that first narrative arc is something that they were able to sit down and figure out and plan the 30 however many pages that is, create that as a cohesive story, pull all the characters together, figure out all the storytelling, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the Mientras stuff is, they're almost more like small little one-shots or nearly one-shots, 1 or 2 pages, that act more as vignettes of, okay, here's a little bit more we're learning about Jimo, or here's a little bit more we're learning about Franklin, or what have you. And some of the other side characters, we're just focus in on this one character for 1 or 2 pages and just look at, here's their home life, or here's their them just hanging out to get a little bit more of a character study for it, or what have you. And they seem more like this is what, from a practical standpoint, from a creative practical standpoint, they seem to be more developed from the sense of, okay, well, we need to put something out on the website, but we don't have time to really do the full story proper. So let's just do this little side bit to get a 1-page piece out or a 2-page piece out. And it seems like they might not have had time to really get into and do the second full chapter without and still service it properly and still do it in a way that services the story and tells the story that it needs to tell. So they're able to do these smaller pieces that don't perhaps require as much thought and planning and development. They can just say, oh, you know what, here's a 1-pager, we can bang this out in a week or however long it takes, and then move on to the next thing. And that might be 6 months from now, or that might be whenever it is. But we can still put this up to satisfy readers for the short term.
Right. And I think describing that second, if we want to call it narrative arc, which is kind of fragmented, mientras, as you pointed out, in many ways, it's almost like a series of sometimes one-shots in terms of story and illustration, sometimes very shorter pieces that are kind of brought together into this mientra, if not storyline, then title. Two of the longest ones that were kind of interesting. One of them is Jimo's dream that he has right before his mother wakes him up and says that Montlló is here. He wants to see you to go to work to shovel snow. And he's having this, again, kind of a Star Trek / Star Wars inspired dream where he and his friends are the main characters. That goes on for a while. And that's interesting in its own way. The one that I find a little more interesting is the storyline in Mientras that deal with Quentin and his business, Quentin's Island Flavors. And I think this is called Beef Patty Blues. You have some neighborhood kids, 3 guys, I guess the teenagers, the same age as Montlló and his friends, who are standing outside Quentin's, and it's a place where they can get burgers. Thus the title of this, story, Beef Patty Blues. But there's something about Quentin that they're afraid of. He kind of freaks them out, the way that he looks and the way that he presents himself. And, it seems unfounded, from what we know of this business owner, Quentin. But these guys, they're teenagers. They're scared. They don't want to go in. And so they hover outside this establishment wondering, should we go in or not? Boy, we're really hungry, but there's something about Quentin that creeps me out. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really go anywhere as a story, but I nonetheless found it interesting and enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think that that particular one was kind of going to that character study thing. It's
yes,
we're just getting a sense of here's who these people are, here's the type of neighborhood they're in, and just basically showing that they're kids, right? Because I think we all had, if not Quentin himself, somebody like him, somebody that, as a kid seemed scary and imposing, and we weren't sure how to approach them, or if we did and said the wrong thing, we get our heads cut off, or, what have you. So I think that speaks to, that these are normal kids. And we're talking about experiences that more or less everybody has had. Even if you haven't gone out, you maybe didn't live in the city, or you maybe you didn't have to shovel snow, depending on where you lived. So some of those, touchstones, I guess, might not feel as relevant to some readers as others. Mm-hmm. But I think something like this does tie back at a little bit more of a universal level. Like I said, you don't necessarily know Quentin himself. You might not be afraid of somebody in quite the same way, but you still have that sense of, as a kid, I was nervous about or scared about going into this one store, or that one weird relative that you never quite were sure about, or what have you. There's some. I think we all had something along those lines that taps into a little bit more readily. Right,
exactly. Another thing I appreciate about Snow Daze, the webcomic, is, and we see this definitely in this first issue, and that storyline they titled Work for the Weary. We see it a little bit in the Mientras arc or collection of arcs, but not near as much or near as apparent in places as in that first issue, Work for the Weary. And that is the contention between Montlló and his friends and the white boys in the neighborhood. And so here we have this kind of rivalry and tension between these teenagers of color, right? Because Montlló and Jimo are Latino and Boy or Franklin is African American. And then there are what Montlló calls the white boys. And so we can assume, and again, this takes place in black and white illustration, but because of what Montlló says, we can assume that these guys are just, not of color. Okay. However you define whiteness. And it's about ownership of the neighborhood, especially in terms of shoveling snow. And so there are times when Montlló has to remind these white boys, this is my territory. I'm the one who is shoveling the snow of the houses and the businesses here. Back off. You go stay in, your part of the city or the neighborhood or another neighborhood. And then even though there's probably more of this, or it's more apparent in the first issue, there is a place in Mientras that it comes to blow. And I think it's, of the entire webcomic, that is the most contentious this kind of rivalry for shoveling snow gets between Montlló and his crew and the white boys.
Mm-hmm. And, and I think that's something that's going to be played up even more. There's not the latest update, but one of the more recent ones is just basically a little promo, says issue 2 coming soon kind of thing. And the story is apparently called Class Wars. And the image that goes along with that is a bunch of students going through the hallway of what presumably is a school, lockers in the background, etc. But it could certainly be, talking about individual classes, studies, kind of thing. But the fact that all of the students are, students shown in the image are different colors, races, ethnicities, all that. Mm-hmm. I think there's the implication here that the Class Wars title will distinctly have multiple meanings, and I think we'll see more of that kind of clash with the white boys later on in this issue 2, whenever that's released.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about, and this was an entry that was uploaded toward the beginning of May of 2017, and it says, coming in 2018, Snow Daze issue 2, Class Wars. Well, I mean, obviously it's not going to come out this year, but it is something to look forward to in the future. And I'm hoping in 2019 this will go up, because, the Snow Day storyline proper, with Montlló and his crew doing what they do, their relationship with various people in the neighborhood and whatnot. I found that much more interesting than the kind of, let's say, narrative enlargement, if we want to talk about that in regarding Story World, with the Mientras entries. But it seems like they're going to get back to, I guess, what you could arguably call the main storyline of what Snow Days is about and what it was intended to do.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that as well. I totally understand that, life stuff gets in the way. You and I have both had plenty of life stuff this year to deal with. So I totally get that. I like that, even though it's been a few years since they've had an update to the story proper now, right? What was it? I think you said 2015 was the last one you saw. Mm-hmm. I like that they're still coming back and say, listen, we're still working on this. We're not going anywhere. Here's a little teaser, or here's a, character study page that we worked on. They're still working on this. And even though that they've had some, whatever stuff they've had to deal with, that it's still something that's going forward. And I like that. They just haven't left off and gone away or something. They're still working on this. They're still telling people, hey, yeah, this is 75% done now. We're getting there. We're almost to where we need to be. And even though they've had some delays, they're still passionate about that. And I think that shows very much in the storytelling on this.
Let's look at the second webcomic that we're going to be discussing, also snow-related, and this is Snow by Night, written by Eric Menge, and we're not sure if it's pronounced Menge, Meng, or Menge, but it's Menge. So, Eric, we apologize if we're mispronouncing the name. and illustrated primarily by Brittany Michel. Now, I say primarily by Michel because there are a variety of short pieces that make up their narrative world that they've created in Snow by Night that come, and these are about 7 or 8 pages long for the most part, that are supplements to the main storyline, but are illustrated by others. And there is a list of who all the contributors are, even to these short pieces, if you go to the website and look up the About page, and it tells you about the creators. And by the way, the website where you can find Snow by Night is easily enough, www.snowbynight, and that's one word.com.
And actually, I want to, while we're still talking about creators, I want to throw out there, Julie Wright is also another primary illustrator on this. Brittany, from what I can tell, she got about, for whatever reason, she essentially bowed out about halfway through the overall story. I think it's like chapter 8 or 9 thereabouts. We're on chapter 17 now.
That's right. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Julie Wright kind of picked up the art duties from there. And she has been the primary illustrator since, like I said, I have to look it up again, but somewhere around chapter 8 or 9 thereabouts.
Yeah, it says on the About page that Brittany Michel is the penciler and inker for volumes 1 and 2, and then Julie Wright for volume 3, but also the artist who did the short piece Winter Fantasy and the Spirits of Seasons prints. So, yeah, so they're different artists, but Menge is the writer of all this stuff.
Yeah. And the story, we should point out, is it follows a character. The primary character is actually called Snow by Night, and she is the daughter of the season Winter, like the mythical embodiment of winter. She's his daughter. She experiences many years ago. She experiences meeting with a mortal that falls in love with her and accidentally dies. And as he dies, he's telling her that she's heartless because she didn't reciprocate his affection. This leads her to go back to her father and say, hey, I was told that I don't have a heart. I want to find out what that means and how I can get a heart. So how do I go about doing that? He puts, I don't know if it's a curse really, but he basically creates her in more of a mortal form, so she can live among humans and try and find her heart. And initially, she takes that very literally, and she's going around trying to take heart-shaped objects, hoping that one of them is her actual heart. And in the process of doing that, she stumbles across a couple of other thieves who are just more out for typical thieving, trying to get as much gold and silver as they can. And we start to get a lot of character development in terms of, well, they're all looking for something that's not quite the same thing, but the paths intersect quite a bit.
Exactly. And the characters that you mentioned that she encounters are also two of the other main figures, in addition to Snow by Night, and that is Blaise Dansereau and Gessard Leblanc. And both Gessard and Blaise they're thieves, but they're kind of good-natured thieves. It's not as if these guys are too, too dark or anything. But, they do have this side to them that may be less attractive to some of the other characters. And they're at one point hired or take on a job where they're trying to catch this thief that keeps taking heart-shaped artifacts. And so that's how they end up encountering Snow by Night, and then I guess you could say befriending her. It's definitely the case with Blaise, who becomes enamored of Snow by Night, and then Gessard becomes, even as the relationship evolves, much more suspicious, because not only does he see that there may be potential problems with Snow by Night, but that his companion and close friend Blaise is kind of going off track, at least in Dessart's point of view. He's not really concentrating on what they need to do, which is making money through thievery and whatnot. And they're called rooks as well in this story world. So I know it's really interesting. I like this webcomic. And you mentioned Snow by Night as a spirit. She's described on the character page as a manitou, a nature spirit of the wilderness. And she's also described as ageless and incapable of empathy. And it says, while lacking the ability to feel love or compassion, she is curious by nature, which I thought was an interesting way of describing her character. And I'm not being critical or argumentative here, but if she's not able to feel love or compassion, then why is she able to feel anger and disappointment?
You know, I noticed that too, and that's actually brought up in the story at some point. Is I forget where, but I did see there's a discussion point where they're talking. Some of the characters are talking about her and say, "Well, she can't be completely emotionless because she got angry with us." Mm-hmm. And I think it may have been Dessart had said something to that effect. He said, "No, she can't be." There's something not right here because she can feel anger. She can feel rage. She gets real pissed at us and she almost killed us. So that's, the fact that she's not emotionalist is basically where he was going with that.
Right. And where she primarily gets angry with Dessart and Blaze is when she slowly learns that they're taking advantage of her. When they first encounter her, Dessart comes up with a plan. He says to his companion Blaze, he says, "Hey, wait a minute now. This is someone who can get us into certain places where we can make some coin. And so let's play along. Let's tell her that we'll help her find her heart." And so that's what they say, "Hey, stick with us and we'll find your heart for you." And so she takes them at their word. But then over time, she begins to realize that the two are just using her for their own benefit. And not only in terms of getting treasures, but also saving their bacon, so to speak. Because there's one scene, I don't know, maybe a third of the way into the story that we have so far, where Blaze and Dessart are, I guess, met in an alley by a rival and his henchman, if you want to call him that, and they're out literally for blood. They have knives and everything. And so they call on Snow by Night in order to help them. And it's interesting how it sounds really weird and fantastical, but Snow by Night has purplish eyes. She's got blue hair, purplish eyes, and she's a manitou, a nature spirit, right? So she can be these different colors and definitely non-human. And when she, I guess, so to speak, goes away or hibernates, whatever you want to call it, all that's left of her, because she is spirit, right? She is snow, is her eyes, and they look like two purple gems. And so Dessart, or I guess more times than not Blaze, keep those eyes, the two purple gems, with them, and when they need to call on Snow by Night, as she tells them, he throws the two eyes, the purple eyes gems, into snow, which is what composes her, and then she materializes.
Yeah, and
it sounds weird.
It sounds weird, and actually that was one of the kind of minor issues I had with it, is that it's not consistent. And I mean, it's presented as not deliberately being not consistent. But it's part of the thing that I don't quite get about it, because as the story goes on, the first couple of times that they do that, Blaze throws these couple of gems into the snow. She appears. They do whatever they need to do, and that's fine. But then after after Snow by Night kind of realizes that these guys are playing her, and that they're not 100% trustworthy like she thought they were at first, then it becomes whether or not she manifests seems to be more dependent on her whims. and whether or not she feels the need to actually communicate with anybody or bring them forward. And there are at least a few instances where Blaze throws these gems into the snow and she doesn't appear. And he says, I don't know why this isn't working. I'm kind of at her, it's almost at her behest. So it's I find it a little confusing on what I guess the kind of the rules are surrounding this. Mm-hmm. And that might be something that could be something that's kind of built into the mythology of Manitou type characters already, and I'm just unfamiliar with it. But I had a little problem with like some of the consistency issues around that. Another one being, if her father Winter has made her human, why does she still have all these powers and act essentially the same as she was a spirit before, as far as I can tell. So I guess it's a kind of a quibble I had with the story. Is the characters are all good. I just don't understand kind of the rules of the magic that are laid down here within the story itself.
Mm-hmm. And, I was thinking about that as well. It could be that this is a story world with certain rules and systems that may evolve over time as the story develops. Right. Mm-hmm. So as Binge is coming up with and developing even more the storyline, things like this may come up, and what he may or even may not do is retrofit some of the previous, like physics, so to speak, into the storyline that he comes up with eventually. But you're right. It's kind of a minor quibble. It is an interesting story overall, though. Yeah. Now, these are the main characters. Another main character is Mathilde, who is, as she's described, the belle of Jassar. But then after a while, she distances herself from him because of his lying and thievery. And she has a problem with that. But there are also a number of minor characters. For instance, we do get to see other Manitous in the narrative. And one of the first ones is a crow by the name of Chugun. Mm-hmm. And we see Chugun, I think, fairly early on when Snow by Night, before she goes to her father and he makes the changes as you described. And then there's another Manitou that I think we see early in the story, but he becomes more prominent in later chapters, I think around 9 or 10. And this is Pause Tread Lightly. Yeah. Who is a Manitou that manifests himself as an Arctic fox with white fur. And he's someone who is much more friendly towards Snow by Night, definitely less threatening than Chugun. So he becomes important as things unfold. But there are a variety of other characters too, and not only in the main storyline, but also in the various short pieces that come at the tail end of each chapter. One of the most prominent of which is an alchemist by the name of Bertrand. And mm-hmm. she is someone who, and correct me if I'm wrong, at first I didn't know how to take her or read her in terms of, is this someone that I should like or dislike or just feel nothing about? And at first I think I felt neutral about Bertrand. But then when we last see her in her final scene, when there's a big explosion and she, gets it, she's doing something that's not very pleasant to Snow by Night. She's taking, what she's doing is she's taking, and what is it called? Aether? It's not ether, but it's Aether. So I don't know how you pronounce that. It could be pronounced ether. She is using a device that she invented in order to sap the ether from Snow by Night. And the ether she uses or sells as a way of healing humans. Now, humans, I guess the ether's a life force. Humans have ether, but they don't have that much. And so we see at least once Bertrand sapping the ether from a guy who needs the money. And as he's leaving, she says, you need to rest because you're going to be weak for a long time. But the thing about manitous, like Snow by Night, is, as Bertrand describes, are made up of almost pure ether. And so she convinces Jassard to kind of lure Snow by Night into her laboratory, and then devises a system where she can strap Snow by Night down, and even being a nature spirit, Snow by Night can't escape the trap that she's laid for her, and then starts to sap her life force. And then is later saved by Blaze. And I think after that moment, and that takes place in maybe chapter 9. I can't remember if it's 9 or 8.
Somewhere right there.
Yeah, but the story seems to the webcomic seems to go off in a different direction after that. In other words, what we see and I believe it is chapter 8, it kind of it's a major turning point.
Yeah.
In Snow by Night.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that struck me as interesting because it's not only a turning point in kind of the basic plot, but also in the very characters themselves. There's because of that moment, because of that scene in where Bertrand is stealing Snow by Night's very life essence. Because of that, everybody directly involved seems to go off in different directions at that point. That's essentially when Mathilde cuts things off with Jassard. That's when Jassard goes off and starts pursuing other kind of thieving opportunities. That's when Blaze literally runs away from town and trying to goes from being just a thief to just trying to really save and help
right, and
Snow
in
by
many ways,
Night.
Comes of his own, really. I mean, it was after this moment that Blaze becomes a much more central figure, and we get to see a more three-dimensional type character.
Yeah. And I don't know if that was deliberate or not, but also that happens to be, and right after that kind of the big explosion is when we also get Julie Wright starts her illustration work on the regular series. So Julie Wright ends up being this, this kind of her addition to the team, or I guess, she was doing some of those smaller stories earlier, but her addition as a main illustrator helps to kind of set this tone that splits between the first half and kind of the second half. As it stands now, I don't know how long the stories go on. She might be able to go do this for another 30, 40 chapters maybe, but as it stands now, where she's got about half the art duties. And I think that where she starts as the illustrator is almost like a different story, I think, and deliberately so. And I think it ends up working well. That I don't know how much this was planned, but the fact that's when she started, I think, is very well timed with the overall story arc, and with that explosion being a definitive point of where the story turns.
Mm-hmm. And so this, I'm trying to look, this webcomic has been around for a long time. I believe it began in November of 2010. That's quite a while. And the last entry was from this year, and I can't remember.
It was very recent, like within the past couple of weeks, easily.
Yeah. And we're into chapter 18 right now. And each of the chapters has a title. So chapter 18 is titled The Hunting Grounds. And so far we have 3 pages, one of which is the cover page to chapter 18. So it's been going on for quite a while, and it's a rather involved storyline.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes too, because a lot of what going back to that splitting the story in half almost so far. One of the things that kept everything together in the first part was that all of these characters knew and were interacting with each other on a regular basis. But now that they've kind of taken their own paths, they're all kind of going off in different directions, like physically, not even necessarily in the same town or city or what have you. So it'll be interesting to see how they're able to, I'm presuming, get all of those stories wrapped back together at some point and kind of knit them back together into one single cohesive story, rather than all these characters going off and doing their own things.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So there's a lot of story potential still to be had.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, this webcomic is part of the Hiveworks network, correct?
You know what? I know it was at some point. I don't know if they technically still are or not, to be honest.
Okay, because in fact, let me go back to the table of contents in one of the later entries. Okay, let's say in chapter 17. I see at the bottom of the page proper, not the web page, but the page of comics, there's a strip underneath where you can click on other webcomics. And I believe some of these I do recognize from Hiveworks, but I don't see any reference to Hiveworks on the site.
Yeah.
So for instance, there are actually listed that you can go to and read a couple that we've looked at from Hiveworks in the past.
Yeah, and that's why I wonder if they're still part of the Hiveworks networks, or is that something that they put on at the time and just neglected to take the code off later?
I don't know, but by I'm looking at the very last page that's gone up not too long ago, and we still have that banner that people can click on. So it could be, I would think that if the banner's still on the page, that they would be a part of Hiveworks Network. But who knows? It could be that they just haven't taken it down. You're right. But even in the earlier entries, there's no indication that these are webcomics that are part of Hiveworks.
Well, for a comic that's been going on for the better part of a decade now, one thing that could have happened, and I have not been following this certainly since 2010. I wasn't aware of it, but that far back. But they could have very well redone the entire site several times over and just applied some of this stuff to a template. And so that any of the Hiveworks material that would have been in a previous template may have gotten pulled off or added on at various points. Right. For a comic we've got, 8 years worth of material here, the site's probably been redesigned at least a couple of times would be my guess.
Yeah.
So
another thing I wanted to ask you about before we move on to our final webcomic of the month, and that is the temporal or cultural tone of Snow by Night. And if you go to the website, you see that this webcomic, Snow by Night, is described as quote, a tale of colonial fantasy, unquote. And as you can tell from many of the names that we've mentioned throughout our discussion, that this definitely does have a French colonial feel to it. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me, it says a tale of colonial fantasy. It's not French colonial that's anchored in a particular place or time. So, for instance, this isn't, let's say, as far as I could tell, and maybe I'm wrong, an American colonial fantasy. In other words, this is not taking place over in North America, either in what is now the upper northern United States or in Canada. So in other words, these could be, Quebecois or future Quebecois for all we know, but I found no indication of specific time and geographic location in this webcomic.
There's a very brief, if you go down to the very bottom of the about page where it lists and talks about all the creators involved.
Right.
There's a very small FAQ, and he says the story is set in a fantasy version of French Canada.
Right. So it's inspired by the real world, but it's not the same.
Right. Exactly.
As he said. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. Now you're right. It does have this Canadian or, this Quebecois feel to it. And there are, let's say, Native Americans, in the story at various places.
Yeah.
but there's no kind of specific temporal or spatial anchor.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, it's what, the first question in the FAQ that you refer to is the question is this set in the real world? And the writer responds, the world of Snow by Night is inspired by the real world, but is not the same.
Yeah. This is okay. Here's an interesting bit that might be worth mentioning then is and this is one of the nice things about the comic is they have an almanac on the page, which, is kind of an about with all the weird cultural details about here's all the world building that's gone into this. Here's the cities, here's the culture, here's he even gets into the description of the calendar system and all that. And if you look on there's a maps section specifically, and as you go through that, you can see, he's got mapped out, here's this region and here's that region, here's where the cities are, there's old mountains over in this area and all that. And if you look at them, they do, at least to me, bear more than a passing resemblance to some of the landforms on our planet, in Earth, as we know it. Not exactly the same, but as you're looking at, for example, Japheth, I think is one of the more obvious ones. It looks a hell of a lot like Europe.
Right. And then Everik, the northeast region, does look like the northeastern part of what we could call Canada.
Right.
Everik, on the other hand, the closest thing that I can tell, it's either a landform off of what somewhat looks like the northeast part of Canada or something like Iceland.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, and where I was going with that is that to me kind of puts a kind of a more of a temporal space on things. That's kind of what we're looking at in terms of, it's not exactly, we're not exactly in French Canada, but this is the kind of the ballpark region that we're looking at, which I think it would go to explain, I think it makes sense to explain just like, say, for example, the weather patterns. They do live in an area that has these potentially harsh winters with lots of snow and whatever. And you wouldn't see that if it were taking place in, say, South America. So I think we can take I think he's giving us some clues as to what he's kind of got in mind, even though he's not stating anything explicitly or directly in terms of location or time frame or anything like that.
Right. Okay, you want to look at the last webcomic that we're looking at, not only for December, but for 2018.
Oh, that's a good point. Yes, this will be the last webcomic we discuss at all this year.
Yeah, it is. And
wow.
There's something kind of sad about that, but at the same time, gives us a feeling of completion.
Yeah, there you go. Good, nice way to end things, I think.
Yeah. And this is a very different kind of webcomic than we've looked at in the past. This is Overwatch Reflections, and it can be found at the website of the video game by Blizzard Entertainment, Overwatch. And the URL of this specific comic is comic.playoverwatch.com/en-us/tracer, TRACER-reflections. Now, so this is on the Blizzard Entertainment website, and these are stories, both the comic that we're specifically looking at, Reflections, but there are a variety of others that are based on the Overwatch video game world. I'm not familiar. I mean, I've heard of it, but I've never played it, and I'm not familiar with and very knowledgeable of Overwatch. Are you?
No, I have not. I mean, same thing. I've heard of it. I've seen a few screenshots and ads for it and whatever, but I've never played it.
Okay. Well, I know that many of our listeners, especially of the Webcomics show, are gamers. And so
Sure.
this will be a familiar world for them. So one of the things that I felt at a little loss with is the characters in the story world in which this takes place. So if you go to comic.playoverwatch.com, then you can see various issues, as they call them, of the various stories. And each story, and we're just primarily going to be focusing on one, is based on, it seems, a particular character in the Overwatch world. So, for instance, I did read the first 2 issues that are available. The first one is based on the character McCree, and then the second one is based on the character Reinhardt. And then there are others as well that are based on other characters like Para, Anna, Junkenstein, Bastion. But we're specifically looking at the story titled Reflections, or the issue titled Reflections, that is based on the character Tracer. And the reason why we're looking at this story, or this issue, which is number 10 of the webcomic based on the Blizzard Entertainment Overwatch game, is it deals specifically with Christmas.
Yes.
Now, you were saying that when you discovered this, that they were calling this a digital comic.
Yeah. When I first was looking at this, they had some of the promotions around, hey, check out our digital comic on promoting Overwatch. And as when I first called it up, it does kind of look like it would be a digital comic, right? It's presented in very similar format to what you would see on, say, Comixology, in the reading format. However, the more I looked at it, the more I was kind of looking and flipping through it. It strikes me as it's not really a digital comic. It seems everything that's presented is presented within that kind of digital comic format, but it's done so within the confines of HTML, which means that, you've got basically a series of large JPEGs that you click through, and you've got a forward and back button and that. And it reads from that sense, the functionality of it reads just like something like Snow Days or Snow by Night.
Right.
Just the formatting takes its cues from digital comics more so than web comics. But the actual presentation, the technology behind it, it's the difference is, and it's been a while since we've discussed this on the show, I think, but the difference as I see it is digital comics require some sort of third-party application or program to run very specifically, right? If you want to read something from Comixology, you have to get the Comixology app, right? Yeah, or you have to launch the Comixology program on your desktop. You can't you can't go in and just save part of the comic down and use that for something else and read it on some other platform or whatever. With a webcomic, all of that is presented within the kind of more generic format of HTML, which means that you can read it on any web browser in any platform, whether you're on your desktop or on your phone or on your tablet or what have you. You do need a browser to read it, but it doesn't matter which one, doesn't matter what platform, doesn't matter what operating system. It's going to work the same way across all of these. And that's what I'm seeing here with this particular, all the Overwatch comics that we're seeing here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they are called webcomics for a reason, because they're based on the World Wide Web. We don't call it the World Wide Web anymore. It's just the web. But it's based on the World Wide Web. And as such, you definitely need a web browser in order to consume that media. And the difference with digital comics is you can ideally, you could look at it through a web browser, possibly with some platforms, but you can definitely bypass the web. In other words, as you pointed out, have a particular app on another device like a tablet or your cell phone, and then not even visit the web at all, not even bring up any kind of web browser, just download directly to the app. And that's the difference between the two. And you're right, I agree with you that they may call this a digital comic, and it is digital, but it's a web comic. And we've said this before, that all web comics are digital comics, but not all digital comics are web comics.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a different kind of experience because, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first time that you and I are discussing a webcomic that is based on a product from another media by a big corporation, Blizzard Entertainment.
Yeah, I believe that is correct. Yeah. I don't think we've looked at anything like that before.
Yeah. Another thing that's notable about this webcomic, I think, all of them that are on this site, but again, we're specifically looking at issue number 10, Reflections, is it reminds me of what we find over at Mark Waid's Thrillbent site, and also how Mark Waid tends to create not just webcomics, but digital comics. And what I mean by that is if you go and check out Reflections, or I guess any of the comics that are on this site, this Overwatch site, if you either click on, let's say, a desktop or a laptop, or tap on, your cell phone or a tablet, what you get is basically one panel at a time. And that's something that is quite akin to what Waid does when it comes to his webcomics and digital comics. And it's also something that is not that different from, let's say, the guided view that you get on Comixology.
Yeah.
And, there's some people who may like that. Personally, I don't. When I look at a comic, whether it be hard copy or in digital format, webcomics or digital comics, and I turn to a particular page, I don't want to be guided in my viewing habits. I don't want one panel at a time. I want to take in the whole page, what is called the mise en page or mise en page, where you get to see the layout of the entire page, which can have a big influence in how we create meaning in a comic. Now, maybe a particular page layout is not going to be that important to certain stories. And so maybe in this case, providing one panel at a time, let's say with each tap or with each click on a page, you get just one panel, then the next one, then the next one until you go on to the next page. Maybe that's okay. But personally, I prefer when I, so to speak, turn a page of a digital or webcomic, I like to see the page in its entirety and then read it, consume it the way that I normally do. I don't want an outside program to determine how I view or take in the page.
Yeah, that's fair. But I will give the Overwatch team who put this together credit is that they at least give you that option as well. This is kind of set up like Mark Waid's stuff from kind of a visual point of view, certainly different technology working behind it, I believe. However, you can, not to use the Comixology lingo specifically, but you can go from that guided view to a kind of more of a page view. And if you click through just using the left and right arrows specifically, it'll give you an entire page rather than a single panel at a time. Right. So they at least seem to recognize that there is that preference, like you have, like I have, that you want to see the whole page at once, and you can just read it as kind of a quote unquote normal comic. And I see the benefit to the guided view in a lot of cases, but I think that's more solving a problem that only exists because you're making a comic. You're porting over a comic that wasn't designed for the platform, more than anything else. And I don't think that's really necessary in this particular case. If you see something like in Comixology, the issue or potential issue is that they've created a comic that's meant for print, but they're trying to show it in a digital format. And because of that, some of the details might not work at the scale that you're looking at. You're trying to look at the thing out. And maybe that's a detail in the art, or maybe that's just the lettering is too small, or what have you. So you essentially get the option to zoom in and look and focus in on that one panel at a time.
Right.
If it's done well, if it's done for the web as a platform, or at least with the acknowledgement that the web is one of the platforms it's going to be on, I don't think that's typically a problem. And that's the case I see here is, you can look at it one panel at a time. I don't think that adds anything to the storytelling. I don't think that you're not missing any detail. I don't think there's never a point where it's difficult to read because the lettering is too small or anything. So you can do one full page at a time and it reads perfectly fine. And why they put in all the extra effort to code within HTML specifically to do that one little feature when that's not really necessary.
Right. Another thing we should point out that readers could do is download this comic.
That's true.
On the left side of the screen of your web browser, you see a little download arrow. And so if you don't want to consume this online, you can just go to either this issue number 10, which is titled Reflections, or any of the other issues that can be found on this Blizzard Entertainment site, and just download them, and then I guess transfer that file to, I don't know, whatever device, and then read it that way. So there's that. I know we mentioned this at the top of the show, but we haven't mentioned this, at least since we started to get into a detailed discussion of Reflections, and that is that the script of this story was written by Michael Chu, and the artist is Miki Montlló. Now, I think Chu and maybe even Montlló contribute to other stories that are found on this site, but each of these issues, as they're called, are by a different creative team for the most part. And some may, some may deal with the same characters. I think there's a second Tracer story as well. But this particular issue, number 10, Reflections, is by Michael Chu with art by Miki Montlló. And I think the story is fine. I mean, it's short and sweet, as all of these are. And the art is quite effective. It strikes me that this is the kind of art that you would probably be more apt to see in a print comic book than you would in a webcomic. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it looks very much like, the people at Blizzard went out and hired a bunch of top professionals to work on this. And you can even see, I recognize some of the names. There's a full list here of credits across the board, including some names that you might recognize from print comics. John Rochelle, Jimmy Bentecourt, I know I recognize that. Albert Deschesne, I recognize those guys from some of their print work as well. So what Blizzard did here, and through no fault of theirs either, is this is a corporate comic, right? They went out and hired people who know how to do comic books, and they, went to the same type of people that Marvel or DC or Dark Horse would go to if they were looking to produce a comic. So as one of the, I think, the benefits of having a corporate comic like that is you can get professional level quality stuff really quickly and easily. We've talked on several comics in the past where we talked about how the artist was just starting out. They may have still been in college or even high school, I think, in one or two cases. And you're able to see their art style evolve as the comic goes forward. And I'm all for that. That's great that they have the opportunity to do that. But what you end up seeing with corporate comics in general is they bypass all that and they wait till the person's already graduated from college, already has a degree, already done all of their kind of pre-work, as it were, and they can essentially hit the ground running. No pun intended with the Tracer story here, but they can hit the ground running with very professional-looking art right out of the gate.
Right.
And that's one of the benefits of the corporate comics. The downside to that is they're essentially got hired guns. So I don't know how much Michael Chu here has a care in the world about Overwatch. He might play, he might not. I don't know. He might care about these characters. He might not. I don't know. That's fine. But what almost inevitably ends up happening is that you don't get quite the level of storytelling passion that you do with something like a Snow by Night or a Snow Daze, where the creators are very personally invested in the story that they're telling.
Right.
So in
terms of the story, well, I mean, we've been talking around Reflections, but we haven't really talked about the story. So how would you describe this very short? Because it's only, I think, really, if you take out the cover and the very last page, it's only 10 pages long. Yeah,
it's not long at all. But it's a fairly simple story. Is that we've got Tracer here is essentially looking for Christmas gifts for her.
Literally running around.
Yeah, literally running around the city at the very last minute, trying to get a Christmas gift for her significant other. I don't know if they're necessarily married or not. Emily, I believe the character's name is. She's not able to find anything, but then somebody gives her their own gift as, hey, thank you for helping out on this other thing that you did. And when she gets home, Emily opens the gift thinking it's hers and finds out it was actually the gift that Tracer was looking for in the first place. Then the two of them go off to Winston's apartment and celebrate the evening with him. And it's more of a joyous occasion and, spending time with others and that kind of message going along. The message being, the importance is
being with loved ones.
Being with your loved ones, not that you actually got somebody a gift or not. So,
And Winston appears to me, and again, I don't play the game, but from what I've seen on this side is, I guess, a cyborg gorilla or a gorilla with cyborg components, it seems.
Yeah.
And there's, I guess, on pages 10, we get a series of images of individuals whom I'm assuming are also characters within Overwatch. Because I do see McCree, he's at a bar and he seems to be passed out. And then there are other figures who, again, look like they are part of, I don't know, whatever, story world Overwatch is a part of. Again, not playing the game, I feel a little bit at a loss. So, it as you pointed out, kind of a fairly simple story about gift giving and the true meaning, I guess, of Christmas. Yeah. And then you do get this 2-page spread where you get all of these characters are coming together, most with other people, not McCree, he's passed out at a bar, who are, partaking of the spirit of Christmas in one form or another.
Yeah, and I think that's that's one of the messages here too, is that it doesn't really matter how you celebrate, whether there's the one scene there with they're sitting around literally with a Santa Claus type figure. There's other characters that are just out for a nice dinner. Other ones who
Reinhardt, I think, a character Reinhardt who looks like Santa, the big guy.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Well, I say that because he's the subject of that second issue.
Okay. I did not read that one. So, okay. But yeah, so you get, these characters are just out having a good time or it looks like, they're at home checking, reading letters to loved ones or writing letters to loved ones or what have you. So I think there's a clear message here that, the what exactly you do and the traditions that you personally celebrate are less important than who you're celebrating with, and the just being again with the people that you care about, and however you guys want to spend your time that makes everybody happy.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that what Christmas is all about?
Absolutely, it's very much a Christmas story, a very very much a Christmas message here.
So there you have it, our final episode, Webcomics episode of 2018. On our December show, Sean and I discussed 3, if not holiday than snow-related titles. We started off with Snow Daze by Leonardo Faierman and Marcus Kwame Anderson, and you can find this at www.snowdayscomic.com. After that, we looked at Eric Menge, Brittany Michel, and Julie Wright's Snow by Night, and check that one out at www.snowbynight.com. And then we wrapped up with a completed webcomic, something quite different, a corporate-produced one, and this is based on the Overwatch game. This title was Reflections, and it surrounds the character of Overwatch Tracer, written by Michael Chu with art by Miki Montlló, and this one can be found at comic.playoverwatch.com/en.us/tracer-reflections. And a big happy holidays from me and Sean and the crew at the Comics Alternative. And we hope that your holiday is filled with great family, friends, fun, and comics reading. And
Absolutely.
you know, Sean, I know of a place where people can get great comics both in print and in digital format at incredible prices.
And where, pray tell, is that?
That's at the sites of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service, and its sister company, mydigitalcomics.com. So be sure to go to dcbservice.com and mydigitalcomics.com. You're going to find incredible specials, savings every single month. We thank them for sponsoring us over another year on this podcast. So again, that's mydigitalcomics.com or dcbservice.com. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about this month's webcomics. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up your phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And if you want to get in touch with us via email, maybe to send a link to a comic you'd like for us to take a look at, you can send us an email at twoguys, TWOGUIS, at comicsalternative.com. Or you can send a message directly to me at Sean at comicsalternative.com.
Or me at Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also reach us via social media. We have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, Slack, and Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on Spotify, on TuneIn, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Podcasts. But you can find every single one of the podcast episodes and the many reviews and comics-related commentary that we've been posting on our blog simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com. So let us hear from you, and we hope that everyone has and is in the process of having a wonderful holiday season, regardless of what you celebrate.
Absolutely. I hope you celebrate with your loved ones. I hope 2019 brings in a fantastic new year for everybody. I think everybody's looking forward to a better 2019 than a 2018, so I hope that starts off very well for you.
Mm-hmm. And we will be back in the new year. Until then, I'm Derek.
I'm Sean, and we'll see you next time.